Did you think of some examples? A couple might be a remote firmware update. So maybe I've got a device that's connected to a network and downloading a new firmware from the manufacturer, or maybe it's even a USB connected device where the user is dragging and dropping or loading the firmware onto the device. The device very well might want some guarantees that the firmware it's receiving absolutely came from the manufacturer and not some malicious party. So there might be some authenticity that's needed there. Maybe another example is a remote sensing network. So I've got a whole bunch of distributed sensors that are communicating data to some sort of central node that's sending that up to a web server. And so then the central node, as it's getting data, over LoRa or Zigbee from these distributed sensors, might want some guarantees that those data messages are coming from authenticated sensors and not from an attacker who's just injecting forged or malicious messages into the system. Okay, so let's get started with the exercises. We are using the example of a secure badge reader to progressively build authentication, in more and more complex ways. And so in this system, this is like, everyone in the facility gets a little plastic badge. They present that badge to the reader on a door, and if they're allowed entry, the door opens, otherwise it doesn't. And in exercise 1, we're going to start with a very basic, somewhat insecure system, but the simplest maybe we would come up with, which is that a badge, when presented to a reader, gives its unique identification code to the badge reader, and the badge reader just matches that to its list of badges that are allowed access. And if it finds a match in the list, then it unlocks the door, otherwise it doesn't. This is not unlike our key fob over here, right? Or you can almost imagine this like a password, kind of like I'm typing a password into a website, where if my device knows the secret, where the secret is the identification code on that badge, then it's given access. And you might already be thinking about a bunch of different ways that we can attack this. We'll get to that, don't worry. For now, exercise 1 on this baseline system is primarily here to make sure that we can run the code, we can access the exercises, and to start to think about those security questions. When do we need to move past this system? Or under, what are the other security mechanisms that we can put in place maybe that justify this as the sort of production level system authenticating people to their doors. So to get started, make sure that you can access the GitHub repository, that you've either downloaded or cloned the code or opened up a code space to access that code. And then once you're there, you can pull up a terminal and pull up the worksheet that's part of the repository. There are 5 main sections in the worksheet for each of the 5 exercises, and within each exercise, there are 3 sort of levels of tasks or questions in these sort of like red, yellow, green kind of striation. And the idea is that you've got some control over how you want to engage with the workshop. The red level exercises are sort of the bare minimum that I would hope my students would complete to be able to say that, yes, they follow along, they understand the code. If you do just the red level exercises all the way through the workshop, then you'll leave with a great understanding of how the code works, and maybe that's what you do and you stop there. The yellow exercises actually get into the material a little more deeply. Once you've run the code and observed the code, the yellow questions ask you, what sorts of security principles are at play? Where did we have to make certain design choices that might bite us in the future? Where is the system vulnerable to brute force attacks or other attacks? So the yellow questions is where I really want students to get, because it starts to help you think about the very important conceptual understanding I want you to get from the workshop. And then the green exercises are trying to take that even further. So for many of those exercises, you are going to modify the implementation. You're going to write new code or analyze a much more difficult scenario. To get there is to truly get an excellent understanding of the workshop. But again, you have your choice in how you want to engage, which questions you want to complete as you do the workshop. So exercise 1 here starts with observing the code as it's being run, which as do most of the exercises. So you can see in my terminal here, I'm going to navigate to that folder. And then the easiest way to observe the code is to run the PyTests. And so this runs a couple of the tests, and we can see here a couple different iterations of the code. They're presenting a badge to the reader with a UID that's in the allow list and then being granted access, and at least in one case, a badge presenting itself to the reader that's not in the list and it being denied access. Of course, you can also just open up a REPL and sort of copy paste the code here and kind of play around with it yourself to see that in operation. And in the red exercises, once you've run that code, there are a couple of questions here that just kind of ask, okay, what's happening? How's the code working? Can we make sure we understand what's going on before we move on to the next exercise? Underneath that are the yellow and green exercises that I would encourage you to attempt, as they get at some of the more important conceptual understanding. But you can treat the yellow and green exercises almost like a little a choose your own adventure, if you will. You don't feel like you need to kind of go through these in order. All right, so open up that code, tackle exercise 1, and then we'll move on to the next video.